Hello, everyone. Phil Beatty here on Encourage, Equip, and Inspire, episode 15. Welcome, everyone, wherever you are and however you may be joining. Thank you for listening in. Again, if this podcast fulfills the purpose of its name, it encourages you, equips you, and inspires you to be a source of light and a force of good in this world, then do me a favor, share this with someone else. Like, subscribe, share on our YouTube channel or on the podcast if you're listening on the audio podcast. Thank you all for your support, and it's my deepest desire of my heart and my prayer that you will be encouraged, equipped, and inspired. So today we are on episode 15 of Encourage, Equip, and Inspire. And the title of today's message is Seasons Change. That's right, seasons change, which seems pretty obvious to say that seasons change. It's one thing we all know, right? We've been taught from elementary school that we have 4 seasons: summer, fall, or autumn, winter, and spring. And sometimes we ask people what their favorite season is, or we talk about our favorite seasons as a way of, getting to know one another. But I wanted to let y'all in on a little something, and maybe you have a similar type of situation going on wherever you may live. But up here in New England, in the northeast corner of the country, we actually have 12 seasons, as delineated by this lovely meme from the internet. Let me share them with you. First of all, we have winter. Then after winter, we have the fool's spring. Then we have second winter. Then we have the spring of deception. And then we have the third winter. And then comes the pollening. And finally, the actual spring. After which we have summer, and then hell's front porch, a false fall, a second summer, and then an actual fall before we go back into winter and start all over again. We mark the seasons not just by the weather, but by activities. Sometimes it's football season or baseball season or a gardening season. We know that in some places you can't garden year round, or there's a rainy season. So it's the activities that we do, right? The school year is a season. Each semester becomes its own season. And there's a camping season. There's a hiking season. There's all kinds of seasons in our life. And I believe that it's one of the most fundamental things that we need to understand as we progress through life is that everything is seasonal. Everything is seasonal. That means nothing lasts the same forever. Let me say that again. Nothing lasts the same forever. And even when we put things into categories and we come around to it again, it might be different than what we went through the last time. For instance, how many of us say, oh man, this winter is nothing like last winter? It's significantly different in not only the amount of snow, the cold, but also that affects the activities that I can do and can't do. And sometimes when we're young, we get this idea that certain things are not seasonal, that I will find a job or a career and I'll work in that career for my entire life. Well, as most of you know today, jobs are seasonal. Things last for a short amount of time and then that they are gone. And I believe that wisdom is gained by understanding this fundamental truth and then adjusting our thinking towards it. One of the biggest examples I think that might illustrate this a little bit better is parenting. And in parenting, you have different seasons because your child is going through seasons and changes in life. So parenting, you're always parenting, but you're parenting in a different way based on the season that you and your child are in. So while the parenting stays the same, you're still a parent, they're still one of your children. The seasons change in the way that unfolds and develops. And maybe what's true of parenting is actually true of all relationships, whether they're friendships or partnerships. Maybe it's good to remember that while the task or the commitment may remain the same, it changes because there are seasons to life. And seasons, I believe, are written into the code of creation to remind us that our life is also short. that our life is not going to just go on and on forever. That even as we experience seasons in our own life, there are times of growth and there are times when things are very quiet and nothing seems to grow. It's good for us to remember that our life is short, that our life is fleeting, that our life is temporary, that our existence is much smaller and much shorter than we really think about. So I was thinking about one of the most famous poems, I believe, in all of literature. And it comes from the Hebrew scriptures, and it's from the book of Ecclesiastes, which is a book of wisdom that many people think was written by King Solomon. Although Solomon is never mentioned, uh, the person writing it down says these are the sayings of the teacher. The teacher was wise, and we know that Solomon was considered one of the wisest people that ever lived. So it's quite possibly Solomon's sayings, or maybe someone's recollection and collection of the wisdom sayings of Solomon. But it contains many famous quotes and words that we use. And one of the most famous poems is found in chapter 3 of this book, A Time for Everything. And as soon as we get into it, I know it'll be very familiar to some of you. But one of the key things to understanding this book of wisdom called Ecclesiastes is this very interesting Hebrew word called Hebel, Hebel, Hebel. So Hebel is a word that has been translated in a variety of ways. In the King James, it was translated vanity. So Ecclesiastes in the King James Version says, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. And then the New International Version translated it as meaningless. So it becomes meaningless, meaningless, everything is meaningless, the opening ode to this entire book. But the word, I believe, has a more basic meaning that those words have attached on top of it. And I remember studying this word a lot in college and over the years. And at its base, the word means a vapor or a breath. And so I think it's talking about how short life is. The picture is almost of mist coming off the ground in the morning, that our life is like the morning mist. It shows the transience, it shows the fleetingness, it shows that the things that we try to hold on to in this life so tightly are really like a mist that we can't grab, because our life in the scope of eternity, in God's eternal timelessness, is much shorter, much more fleeting than we want to admit. Now, the word Hebel, meaning vapor or breath, is also the name of Adam and Eve's second son, Abel. So Abel is a translation of the word Hebel, which is the same word. So the word Abel means breath. And I just think when we look at the meanings of the names, especially of the first humans in the creation stories, that it's a beautiful and poetic way to look at our lives together. I came across this theologian, Reverend Dr. Michael Zeigler, and he wrote in the Lutheran Hour about Hebel and about how it relates to the name of Abel. And I would just like to read a quote from that for you. He said, "We are blessed with a variety of ways to express this captivating, fascinating word, vanity, as the translation today, but there are others: vapor, futility, absurdity, pointless, or meaningless. But the basic meaning of Hebel is breath. It is also the name of the second son of Adam and Eve. We usually pronounce it Abel, but it is the same Hebrew word, Hebel, meaning breath. Abel, or Hebel, was the second human born outside of the Garden of Eden. Here in a moment, then gone in a flash of rage, murdered in cold blood by his older brother Cain. Cain sounds like the Hebrew word for acquired. After Adam and Eve betrayed God's trust in the garden, Cain became their firstborn, and soon after, Hebel was born. This is from Genesis chapter 4. So the opening chapters of the Bible could be summarized as follows. Our first parents, Adam and Eve, whose names mean human and life, had a son called acquired. Separated from God, human and life brought forth acquired. And what they acquired stole their breath away. And the whole world's been Hebel ever since. For a native Hebrew speaker saturated in these Old Testament accounts, the word Habel was rich with multiple meanings, which may be why it's difficult to pick just one English word to render it. The word invokes the wonder and the weariness of life, both beautiful and brief, fragile, fleeting, sometimes absurd, but also something God said was worth saving. Wow, I just find that beautiful. The wonder and the weariness of life. So the main motif of Ecclesiastes is that everything is Habel. Everything is a vapor, is a breath. It's about the wonder and the weariness of life, the fragility and the beauty, and the amazing fact that God would place such importance and significance on such a Habel type of existence. Well, let me go ahead and read for you this poem, but I also want to read the setting of this poem. So I'm going to read the entire chapter of Ecclesiastes 3, which are the teachings of wisdom of this wise teacher. And inserted within these teachings is this poem. So as I read the context, it'll help us understand the poem a little better. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to uproot. A time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to tear down, and a time to build. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones, and a time to gather them. A time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to search, and a time to give up. A time to keep, and a time to throw away. A time to tear, and a time to mend. A time to be silent, and a time to speak. A time to love, and a time to hate. A time for war, and a time for peace. What do workers gain from their toil? I have seen the burden God has laid on the human race. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I know that there's nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. This is the gift of God. I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it, nothing taken from it. God does it so that people will fear him. Whatever is has already been, and what will be has been before, and God will call the past into account. And I saw something else under the sun. In the place of judgment, wickedness was there. In the place of justice, wickedness was there. I said to myself, God will bring into judgment both the righteous and the wicked, for there will be a time for every activity, a time to judge every deed. I also said to myself, as for humans, God tests them so that they may see that they are like the animals. Surely the fate of human beings is like that of the animals. The same fate awaits them both. As one dies, so dies the other. All have the same breath. Humans have no advantage over animals. Everything is Habel, vaporous. All go to the same place. All come from dust, and to dust return. Who knows if the human spirit rises upward, and if the spirit of the animal goes down into the earth? So I saw that there is nothing better for a person than to enjoy their work, because that is their lot. For who can bring them to see what will happen after them? The very first line of the poem seems so obvious, yet it is so profound. There is a time to be born and a time to die. There are seasons of grief in our life. In fact, there are several seasons where we experience the death of someone we love or someone we know. And it causes us to reflect, and it causes us to ponder. I recently was notified of the death of a friend of mine who was very young. He was also a pastor in ministry, and we had connected several times over the years. Someone that had always had a word of encouragement, was very talented, very gifted. a beautiful person and a beautiful soul, and he died. He was gone suddenly, unexpectedly, at age 38, with two young twin boys under 2 years old left behind, along with his wife and everyone else who loved him. And there's a deep, deep sadness, of course, but there's also a lot of reflection because I believe that every time someone we know or is close to us dies, it taps into the deeper ongoing grief of all the people that we've lost. And it usually begins with a grandparent, but sometimes it's a friend or coworker that dies suddenly. But then all throughout our life, they just begin to stack up the amount of people we know that die. And so this season of grief kind of goes through its own cycles, and we realize that it's a time to think about what's really important in life. So that's why I say it seems obvious to say there's a time to be born and a time to die. We all know that we have a time to die. We all know that death comes for us all. We all know that our days are numbered. The psalmist wrote in the Psalms that all of the days that were ordained for me were written in God's book before one of them even came into existence, meaning that God has set the seasons and the rotation of the earth and everything else, that God has set the number of days that each one of us is to have. And so we don't know what that is. That's not information that has been shared with us. But there is a set amount of time that we have on this earth, and we don't know how much time that it is. In another place in the Psalms, the psalmist wrote in Psalm 90, verse 12, this prayer: Lord, teach us to number our days that we might gain a heart of wisdom. So I think there's an encouragement, a wisdom that is very old in this world that says when we understand that our days are numbered, when we understand that we have a limited amount of time, then wisdom comes from that. That when we have that proper perspective, that we can gain more wisdom and insight into life and therefore live life even better. So again, what may started out seemingly obvious to people listening, life has seasons. Seasons change. People change. Nothing seems to last in the same way forever. Our own life does not last forever. Our very existence is a season in the grand scheme of all creation and all history. And actually a very small one at that, almost a blip on the radar. Then what we do with the short amount of time we are given becomes very important to us, because if we want to live it well, if we want to do the best that we can do, if we want to contribute to the goodness of God's universe, if we want to be a light that shines in the darkness, that continues to burn and give people hope, then I think putting everything that we do into this perspective will help us. So what is the wisdom that we can gain when we learn to number our days, when we learn that there's a time and season for every activity under heaven? Well, first of all, that knowledge that nothing lasts forever means, I believe, and these are some things that I've learned along the way, and I'm still learning, still in process, but that I wanted to share with you today. When I think about that nothing lasts forever, I remind myself not to take myself too seriously and not to take what I do too seriously. That means that what I do and who I am and what I say is important, but I have to remember to put it in perspective. And sometimes we take our successes too seriously and we think too much of ourselves and we think we've done something great, when who's going to remember even what we said or did, in the next generation or the generation after that? Sometimes we take our failures too seriously. We think that we've destroyed or ruined everything, when really, it happened, but in the grand scheme of things, God is able to redeem and restore so much more than we are able to fail and mess up. God is able to redeem and restore so much more than we are able to fail and mess up. And so I think there's wisdom in realizing not to take ourselves too seriously, realizing that what we do is important, it's good, but also that it's brief and it's temporary, and it's for a time, and it probably won't last forever. You know, we have this phrase, "You can't take it with you," and we all know that. But how much of what we're striving for, working for, are about things that we literally cannot take with us after we die, or things that we think we're building, but who's to say what's going to happen after we die? As Ecclesiastes said, who can bring us to see what happens after we're gone? No one. We have no idea. We have no idea how we're going to be remembered, if we're going to be remembered. We don't have any knowledge of that. That's why this is an interesting book of wisdom and philosophy, saying the best thing you can do is to enjoy the life that you have, enjoy the life that you've been given. And that brings me to my next point, which is the wisdom that we gain from numbering our days is we must learn to accept life as it is, not as we would like it to be. For there are certainly things that can be changed and that we can work to change. But there is a wisdom in first accepting what is. Instead of trying to deny reality, instead of trying to work so hard to change something because we're uncomfortable with the reality of it, we need to accept life as it is, to say, this is my life. Accept people as they are, right? Yes, change may come, but to understand accepting them means we accept them in that moment with the knowledge in our head that everything is seasonal. So the way I encounter this person right now is just a season of their life, and God is still at work. And the way that I encounter myself at this period in my life, I have to accept myself as I am, is also with the knowledge and reality that everything is seasonal. That I may be in a season of building, I may be in a season of tearing down. I may be in a season of mourning, I may be in a season of laughing. I may be in a season of trying to find something, I may be in a season of letting go of something, but I'm not going to stay the same. That as the seasons change, I am also going to go through seasons. And at the end of the day, my life is very brief. My life is like a vapor. It's a breath, really. It's like a mist in the morning that rises and looks cool for a minute, but then it dissipates very quickly. And what trace is really left? So remember that nothing lasts forever, including us. Don't take ourselves too seriously. Accept life as it is, not as we would like it to be, and learn to enjoy life. Learn to enjoy. So many of us miss the simple joys of life, the joys of good food and drink and laughter and embracing and kissing and talking and all of those things. We can enjoy them. We can say thank you for this moment, God. And also the fact that God has given such importance and beauty to us, even though we're so temporary, is amazing. Jesus said, consider the flowers of the field, and how God clothes them with beauty, and they're here today and gone tomorrow. Consider ourselves, that we are so temporary that our life is like a breath or a mist, and yet God crowns us with beauty and love and importance and significance. It's just mind-boggling. It really is mind-boggling. Remember verse 11, where it said, God has made everything beautiful in his time. God has also set eternity on the human heart. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. There is a sense in which God has a timing that we don't understand because of our limited nature and God's unlimited nature. God's timing is something that we can never really understand. So the choice we have is, do we trust God's words, or do we continue to live with despair and angst and unsettled spirits because we don't know what's going to happen? We aren't sure of the future. I believe that God is making everything beautiful in its time. I believe that God wants us to understand, in the way that our lives in this world is created, that there is a timing aspect to everything that we say and do. So one of the last things I want to share with you is that timing is everything. Timing is everything. Sometimes we want things and it's the right thing, but it's not yet the right time. And learning timing is not something you can study in a book. It's not something that you can just get like that. It comes through practice, through living life. What's the best way to learn the game of soccer? It's to play soccer. What's the best way to learn to play a musical instrument? By playing the musical instrument. What's the best way to learn anything? It's by doing it. So how do we learn timing? How do we get timing right in life? We do it by living life, by trial and error, by making decisions, by seeing our mistakes, by realizing, okay, maybe that was the right thing, but maybe my timing was off. How can I adjust my timing? Or how can I listen? Or how can I observe what is going on in the world, in my heart, and around me so that I can understand what season I am in? That is the question, friends. The question I have for you today is, what season are you in? Is it a time to build or a time to tear down? Is it a time to be silent or is it a time to speak? And how do you know? You know by doing it. So pray for wisdom and follow the gut feeling of the Holy Spirit inside of you. And if it's a time to be silent, be silent. And if it's a time to speak, then speak. And maybe you get it wrong. But if you get it wrong, you'll learn. And then you'll begin to understand and analyze the timing of things. There are some hard questions that come up in this passage that I simply want to acknowledge and address and freely admit that I don't have the answer for. The last two phrases, especially, there's a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. And it makes me wonder, is there really a time for war? Is there a time to hate? Is there a time to kill? Those are things that feel like should never be. There should never be a time for that. And yet we find them here in this poem, talking about the different seasons, the different things in life. And we've all experienced them. We've experienced every single one. And we certainly know that in this world, there is killing and there's hatred and there is war. But the hard question is there still a time to kill, a time for war, and a time to hate? So there's at least three options for understanding this. I'll go through them briefly. Number one, this is simply a description of reality, not assigning any, morality to it. It's just describing the reality of the world. That when we look around, there's war, and then there's peace, and there's hatred, and then there is love. And the deeper meanings are hidden from us. It's not something that we can understand why they still exist, but we just acknowledge the reality that they do. So number one, a description of reality. Number two, we could look at this historically and say that there once was a time for war, but now there is no longer a time for war. There once was a time to kill, but there's no longer a time to kill. And while that doesn't make us completely comfortable with the previous era, it is a way of trying to understand that when Jesus Christ came, Jesus ushered in a new era where it is no longer a time for war or killing, but it is a time for nonviolence. And even though we don't live up to what Christ wanted, we can look at it historically and say whatever happened in the past, we don't fully understand, but we know that the time for these things belongs to a different era, and that in our time, in our day, it is not the time for war; it is the time for peace. So maybe that time is a longer a period of time that we are living in. Then a third option would be that some people would say there's a justifiable reason for killing and for war. For instance, self-defense, saving someone else from dying, saving a group of people from genocide, that those are legitimate reasons when we would employ violence and war to accomplish a greater good. I don't know if that's right or not. I'm not sure how to answer these tough questions. But what I know is that the main focus of this entire passage is all of our thinking and reflection can be grounded in the fact, as the old saying goes, that this too shall pass. This too shall pass. Boy, we feel it with the teacher, don't we? When the teacher says, I saw something under the sun. It was weird. It wasn't right. There was wickedness in the place of justice. And we're like, yes, we see wickedness in places where it shouldn't be. And we see wicked people succeeding and thriving. And we see that justice is being denied. But I think the hope that we're called to is that justice is not denied, but it's simply being delayed. That while we as humans can deny justice to one another, there is a God in heaven who will bring every deed into account. And that justice denied on earth is not justice delayed, is not justice denied by God, but it's justice delayed. So there will come a time, there will come a time when everything will be set right. There will come a time when the wars will end, when conflict will cease. So we keep this light of hope on. We try to keep this light of hope burning in our lives, as difficult as it may be, because what we can be encouraged with by remembering that God is the one who has created us, God is in charge, and by remembering that God in Jesus Christ has come to walk with us through this life, we can maintain hope. And so this life is full of grief. There's a lot of things that we need to grieve. And I believe that grief is a process where we take a lot of our anger and it gets kind of mulched up in the soil of our heart, and it becomes this sadness that we live with. And it's not that we move through grief to get out of it and get to some end. I believe that all of our life is in some way, shape, or form a grieving process. But we can move through grief, not to hope, but with hope. We can walk with hope because Christ is here with us, because eternity has been set in our hearts, that we understand that we are built for transcendence, even though we can't yet experience it. But there will be a final season in human history, friends. All of these seasons are leading up to a season when there will be a final season on the face of this earth, a final season for all of these activities. And when we pass through that season, we will enter into a new timeless reality of the fullness of God's glory and presence in a new heaven and a new earth. So I'd like to leave you with this encouragement. It's a few lines from A Song for Someone by U2. That's the name of the song, A Song for Someone. And I encourage you to look up this song and listen to it at some point later on today or tomorrow, because we need words to remind us of the hope that we need to carry in our heart. And maybe you know another song that does that for you. Maybe there's another song that you listen to, and there's something about it just kind of stirs the little flame of hope inside your heart. But here's the lines from that song. If there is a light you can't always see, and there is a world we can't always be, if there is a dark within and without, and there is a light, don't let it go out. There is a time and season for every activity under heaven. Our life is short, but our life has value to the eternal creator and sustainer of everything that is going to far outlive us. Let us keep the flame of hope alive, because we are built for glory, even though now we travel through grief. My friends, may you be encouraged, equipped, and inspired to continue to shine your light in the world. And may you give yourself grace to not take yourselves too seriously, but to receive all of the gifts of God in your life and to walk through the difficult moments hand in hand with hope, whose name is Jesus Christ. God bless you all.